So before we begin, I'd just like to say what I like to say is mea culpa. Excuse me, I apologize for any discrepancies, omissions, inaccuracies, offenses, or errors on my part. I'm far from an expert. Aloha Kakao. Happy November 19th. Can you guys all see that? This cereal happens to be something that I ate quite frequently as a kid. Your friendly neighborhood Batman here to present you some vital information to survive this current state of martial law imposed on the innocent citizens of planet Earth. In this keynote, I will cover the following topics: the hoax, what is a virus, beneficial viruses, plasmids, Bio-Nanotechnology, the 2020 vision, and the crowning touch. Let's proceed, shall we?
Good evening. Could we have your name, please?
Yeah, Carlos Zapata. I wasn't going to speak. I was asked to speak here. Sheriff, good to see you. I'm telling you guys, I'm pretty appalled at what's going on. At first we sat as concerned citizens that we all wanted to figure out how to best navigate our way through this whole COVID thing, And as we realized that it's not quite as dangerous as we thought it'd be, I was absolutely appalled at the cowardice, And as you're sitting there with your masks on, I don't blame you for wearing masks, because I'd be hiding my face too if I was you for what you're doing. It's absolutely horrendous what you're doing to these people. I'm a business owner, and
Carlos is going to go on for a while here, so I'm going to skip around a little bit.
And I'm telling you, our gentleman's doing behind his mask right there. Better be happy that we're good. I'm not a criminal. I've never been a citizens real soon. That we're building, we're organized when time comes, because our ears, you absolutely listen.
Hold on.
And if you don't hear the seriousness of my voice, I hope you open your ears. You absolutely listen to what I'm saying. Because this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. It's not going to be rah-rah. It's not going to be speeches. It's not going to be gathered outside saying a Pledge of Allegiance. It's not going to be waving flags. It's going to be real. When you've seen the things that I've seen, I went to war for this country. And I never wanted to go. It will happen. Let our citizens do what they need to do. Let owners of businesses do what they need to do to feed their families. Take the masks off. Quit masking and muzzling your children. The psychological damage you're doing to them is horrible. I've had 6 friends kill themselves since it's happened. Veterans who lost their jobs. How do you feel about being complicit in perpetuating that? The greatest hoax ever perpetuated on the American people.
Right. I think that's my point here. So, we're really in red country now. I think I'll remove that. Finally, I can breathe again. Got rid of my COVID-compliant bat mask. When we hear the word COVID, what do we mean? Consumerist, overconsumption, very much like Idiocracy. Have you guys seen that movie? It's amazing how much it reflects our current society. Disease. Overconsumption today includes social media, everybody on their cell phones all the time, virtual societies that don't quite connect with tangible reality. It's amazing that anything gets done anymore. Technology that people buy too much of, they love buying new machiners to do all their work for them, but then spend so much time maintaining, repairing, or replacing these roboters. And of course, rhetoric. What is rhetoric? These are expressions or things people say without really understanding what they mean, but it sounds cool because everybody else is saying it, and then you're part of the in crowd, right? Phrases like, be safe. I mean, it's a good thing to be safe, but come on. Do we have to say it 1,000,000 times a day? We're all in this together. And of course, here's an old one. Remember 9/11? Sometimes don't you wish all this stuff would just disappear? Oh, shoot. that nasty COVID is still around. How much more can we milk out of this? How about the truth? Carbon overload volume is deadly. So right now, mass media overplays this pandemic. An article as early as March 18th this year states most Americans believe the media have exaggerated the risks of COVID-19. Almost half claim they've seen made-up news. We also got control over people's behavior that creates negative effects, mental disease. And here's a quote: many of the anticipated consequences of quarantine 14 and associated social and physical distancing measures are themselves key risk factors for mental health issues. These include suicide, self-harm, alcohol, substance misuse, gambling, domestic, child abuse, psychosocial risks such as social disconnection, lack of meaning or anomie, entrapment, cyberbullying, feeling a burden, financial stress, bereavement, loss, unemployment, homelessness, and relationship breakdown. To name only a few, right? It's true, the duress of forced isolation induces stress, anxiety, psychological trauma, even physical illness. As humans, we require real human social contact to maintain our good health. Again, we've got more effects like corporate greed, or are these causes? All about the money. Lawrence Brown, writer for the Cape Cod Times, in his article, July 24th, states some corporations don't mind if thousands of us die, provided there are profits to be made. Now let's clarify exactly what is a virus. Well, I think most of us know by now it's usually a piece of nucleic acid, DNA or RNA, encapsulated in a protein. They exist everywhere, in ocean water, humans, sky and space. In the marine habitat, viruses are actually the most abundant thing around. 1 teaspoon of seawater typically contains more than 1 billion viruses. And yet, so many of us love swimming in the ocean, and we often feel amazing after doing so. It's part of our real life experience and very healthy for us. Viruses are everywhere. The human virome is the total collection of viruses in and on the human body. In fact, every surface of our body, inside and out, is covered in all kinds of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and all kinds of microbes. In our bodies, we know bacteria cells are 10 times more abundant than our very own human cells. That means there's 10 bacteria for each one of our human cells in our bodies. Viruses can be hundreds of thousands of times smaller than the bacteria, so if you do the math, there are probably about 10,000 viruses for every human cell in our body that exist. And in healthy people, ubiquitous in our bodies, estimated 380 trillion viruses. They compose the human virome. The accepted definition of viruses says they are parasitic and not really alive. They don't grow, they don't respond to external stimuli, they can't move on their own, and they cannot perform independent metabolism. But I refute that. I think it's a clouded vision and a misconception. In fact, when viruses remain latent and unexpressed in their host cells, couldn't we call this mutualism? Scientists suspect that all living organisms carry viruses in an inactive form in their cells. In fact, we now know that about 8% of our human genome comes from viruses. Now we're going to get a little commercial for a second here.
If you're not using RIE for project management and team collaboration, you're
Here we go.
to home. Research in 2009 dated a gene found in mammals called CGIN1 to the early days of mammal evolution, between 125 and 180 million years ago. And that gene is thought to have originally come from a virus because parts of it resemble a type of RNA virus called a retrovirus. And guess what? You're a mammal. So some retrovirus infected a sperm or egg cell in one of our mammal ancestors millions of years ago, and now a gene derived from it is in you. And again, yeah, probably me too. Scientists don't think this gene has much of a function, but they do think it's just one of many examples of how viruses have left their mark on our own DNA. In fact, it's been estimated that 8% of the human genome includes sequences that originally came from viruses. So paleovirology...
More evidence to refute the old definition of viruses. Mimiviruses are huge. They infect amoeba, and they encode for protein translation enzymes. That's very unique. Brand new to science to find this out, because we didn't think viruses encoded for proteins that can replicate nucleic acid. So is this a leftover from a time when viruses used to be able to do so, or are they adapting and learning to do so? Still a mystery. Let's talk about beneficial viruses. From day 1 or 2, human children begin to develop their native flora in their gut, which includes the viruses they need to survive in life. Some of these are what we see in these beautiful pictures, bacteriophages. They look a little scary, spider-like. Fortunately, they don't infect us. They actually attacked bad bacteria in our gut and then reproduce in those bacteria. Bacteriophage actually means bacteria eater. You guys may have seen this already in your classes. You see the bacteriophage consists of the head portion, a thin cylindrical core surrounded by a sheathing coat supported by 6 spider-like fibril legs. These legs anchor the virus in place when the phage attaches to its bacterial host. These viruses infect and kill bacteria without any negative effect on human or animal cells. In fact, they're very positive for us. So they're not parasitic. We might be able to employ them to treat bacterial infections. This field is still very new, and they're looking at it for the treatment of infections during pregnancy because it's highly specific for its target, leaving the surrounding microbiotic biota intact. In fact, viruses in the ocean can lyse or kill marine bacteria, and it's possible that they also influence the climate, biogeochemical cycles, carbon sequestration capacity of the oceans, and the gas exchange between the ocean surface and the atmosphere. Here's a beautiful picture of bacteriophages in action. Look at them. Go bacteriophages. All right, now we're going to see a cool video how these guys operate. And you check this out. Our old definition says viruses don't move. What would you call this? I mean, we're talking about philosophical questions about what is life. I call this movement. To me, this seems very, very alive. And a little bit scary too, but fortunately, these guys are on our side. Plasmids. Plasmids are sometimes circular DNA strands in bacteria, fungi, protozoa, plants, and animals. They are smaller than viruses because they're only nucleic acid. They don't have the protein coat like a virus. In plants, they may be called viroids. Viroids are circular strands of RNA in the nuclei of infected plant cells. They may remain latent and produce no symptoms in the plant. I wonder if they might also give some plants adaptive benefits. If so, the viroids may go undetected, all the while enhancing a plant's survival in a novel environment. For example, some plants don't do well in a new location until they get naturalized. Viroids may transfer between plants via pollen, ovules, machinery, or other vectors. We don't yet understand how viroids produce symptoms of a disease in plants, but I suspect they mostly create problems when a plant's already suffering and compromised, and the viroids sense their host dying, and so they basically reproduce many copies of themselves before evacuating from the host. and this reveals itself as a plant disease. An example of invisible viroids in action might be poison oak. This vine grows wild in parts of California and elsewhere. People sometimes observe how poison oak seems to mimic its neighboring plants. Vines growing near oak trees might appear more stout or have larger leaves with more lobing than usual. The poison oak might acquire this trait from oak trees via viroids, while a member of the same species of poison oak might look and grow differently when it grows next to other plants, such as pine trees. Other factors to, of course, consider would include soil types, leaf litter, and microbes in the poison oak's vicinity. Plasmids make a great tool for recombinant DNA technology. They become vectors that can transfer genetic information between organisms and even species. They are an evolutionary mechanism offering adaptive advantages. On the right, we see a picture of the T1 plasmid. That's from the Agrobacterium tumefaciens bacteria. It is a circular plasmid, and it's the one that's most commonly used for recombinant DNA technology. We define bio-nanotechnology as the application of biology to nanotechnology. This involves manipulating individual atoms and molecules. It signals a possible new wave of medicine via genetic cures and viruses. Imagine if you could use viruses to actually insert pieces of needed DNA into somebody to cure them. We can also now deliver DNA via carbon nanotubes manufactured in the laboratory. And of course, everybody is probably familiar with the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing enzyme at this point. Now we get to the 2020 vision. I'm wondering if we might be able to find other sources of cause for pandemics. Might there be environmental triggers? For example, the Spanish flu that went from 1918 to 1919, a time of great psychological stress in the world during World War I, actually the end of it. This was the war to end all wars. The Spanish flu just kind of disappeared in 1919, around the time of the Versailles Peace Treaty. In 1981, we had the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it might be that plastics were the cause. We now know that plastics in the body can cause immunological diseases. And there are actually plastics in all of our bodies at this point. It's an effect of the industrial era. Today, 2019, since that year that COVID-19 came out, we're seeing global warming, a carbon overload in the atmosphere, and a severe acute respiratory syndrome. Perhaps also cell phones create psychic disorder, loss of touch with reality, loss of the curative elements of human touch, compassion, and comfort. All the things that we need to be healthy. CV-19 strikes at those already suffering from poor air quality, or vaping too much, or other respiratory illness. Seek and ye shall find, the classic proverb. This involves the idea of perception. Let me tell you the story of the 8 Buddhist monks standing in a circle around an elephant. Each one of them says the elephant looks a different color. It's all about how you look at it. The COVID virus probably exists in everyone by now, along with other, even newer viruses. We all know viruses can mutate and replicate much faster than our own cells. So when anyone gets sick or dies of any cause today, people try to blame it on COVID. Prions. Hey, just in time for Christmas. Look at that nice green and red colors. These guys are pretty darn scary. They don't have any nucleic acid. They're only proteins, and they're way more infectious than viruses. In fact, the researchers who eventually isolated them had to wear double, maybe triple gloves. It was a laboratory nightmare. The word prion stands for proteinaceous infectious particles. They're relatively new to the scene of infectious disease agents. Prions are misfolded proteins, isolated and identified by Stanley Prusiner in 1982. I had the privilege of inviting him to speak for my microbiology club. He presented his information. It was very informative and scary, too, to think about. Some people refute the notion of prions, saying it's bunk, but you'll find it's in all the textbooks at this point, and a lot of research is going on with proteins. Prions lack nucleic acids. They're misfolded proteins with the ability to transmit their misfolded shape onto normal variants of the same protein. So if proteins can do this, that means they don't need DNA or RNA to transmit information. This brings us to the notion of proteins perhaps coming first in evolution. Many scientists do believe proteins arose before nucleic acids in the primordial soup of all the molecules that eventually became us. And because of these ideas, there are also scientists that are developing and researching the ideas of reverse translation. In other words, polyamino acid reverse translation, or PART. So one supporting idea for reverse translation is that proteins can transmit their folding information, whereas DNA and RNA doesn't. Perhaps today's world places too much emphasis on nucleic acids. Essentially, DNA and RNA are only digitizations of proteins. The difference between nucleic acids and proteins is like the difference between video recordings versus real-life actual experience, or learning from books versus learning from people. Realizing this, I came up with the idea of enzymatic mimicry while I was working on plasticulous fungi, in other words, fungi that have the ability to digest plastics. And found out that there are also bacteria that can digest plastics. And we have enzymes that we can put on plastics to digest them. Well, what if in nature a bacteria that digests plastic uses an enzyme and then leaves residue of these enzyme proteins in the environment? The bacteria have mutated rapidly and found a way to digest a new food source, but other organisms might be a little slower than them. And yet, when they go to that environment, something like a fungus might pick up the trail of enzymes and use polyamino acid reverse translation to create a nucleic acid sequence in order for that fungus to produce the same enzyme for itself to survive in that environment. It's kind of like you go to a new neighborhood and you don't really know how to survive there. People do things a little differently, but then you watch them for a while and you listen to what they're doing and you kind of pick up on it and then you start acting like them, and pretty soon you find out that you can do pretty well in your new home. Enzymes found in the environment might be picked up by microbes or other organisms that try to copy them to survive there. Another idea that I came up with while working on the fungi is that of microbial communication. In a sense, enzymatic mimicry is a form of communication between microbes. When microbes hear the enzymes that they find in the environment, they've received a message from other organisms that survive there. Furthermore, with so many microbial cells in our bodies, we are more than just ourselves. We are an amalgamation, a microbial community, interacting with the microbial communities of other hosts. In humans, animals, plants, and fungi, this notion might account for something like telepathy? The crowning touch. Here it is. We all know corona means crown. Scientific ideas evolve over time. For example, new studies indicate the presence of humans in America nearly 30,000 years ago, much earlier than previously believed. Humans are still evolving, especially today, with so many interracial marriages. It's good to bring in new genetics. It will make the offspring stronger. This quote comes from After the Flood in the most recent issue of Hanahu magazine, about renewing the herds of buffalo on Kauai. Speaking of herds, herd immunity occurs when a large portion of a community, the herd, becomes immune to a disease, making the spread of disease from person to person unlikely. As a result, the whole community becomes protected. This involves a period of equilibration. It takes time for new genetics to integrate into the herd. During the transition, resisting the change may actually lead to disease, whereas integrating needed information into our genome allows us to reprogram our system to produce new proteins and enzymes and survive in a changing environment. Healthy practices like eating balanced meals, getting enough exercise and sleep, and maintaining social contact with other humans may ease the uptake of new genes into our DNA. People who hide and shelter themselves away will eventually succumb to illness. You don't see other animals, plants, fungi, or bacteria dropping dead from COVID. Neither do they go around wearing masks or trying to anti-socially distance. Perhaps they've already evolved to survive in our carbon-loaded climate and incorporated the new genetic information that allows for higher intakes and metabolism of atmospheric carbon? Genetic exchange is already outside our control. It might be best to be like water and go with the flow. E kahe, akahawai. Another angle to consider is epigenetics, the study of gene triggering. Specific factors can affect the expression of genes so that an altered phenotype reveals itself even while the genotype remains the same. An obvious example is how a person may look so different during the different stages of their life. Similarly, latent viruses hiding in our cells might never gain expression unless some trigger induces them to activate. The science of genetics is in its infancy. Clearly, our modern science has a long road ahead of it before we might understand all of its many intricacies. The Hawaiian word maoli signifies something we may perceive intermittently. It describes the essence or seat of life and also a ghost or spirit. Ola means life, health, well-being, salvation, also healed, to live, to spare, to heal, to grant life. Mauli Ola, the Hawaiian god of health and wellness, is the patron of the ancient kahuna healing arts. Our own University of Hawaii recognizes the huge importance of Mauli Ola, the interconnectedness of the environment and health, and how our social environment relates to mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Mauli Ola is an akua maoli, a deity not having any visible form, very similar to an unexpressed virus. This reminds us there exist forces which we may not always discern nor ever completely understand. Research into and the employment of their benevolent, cooperative nature will deliver hope for our future. Our bodies contain so many viruses, these microbes must have a vested interest in our survival. If all viruses were bad, we would certainly all be dead long ago. Perhaps the good flora in the human virome can also protect us from harmful invasive viruses. Thus, any treatment to kill off all the viruses in our bodies would certainly destroy us too. Scientists have yet to fully investigate the level of beneficial viruses that exist within us. Also, we need to better understand the exchanges of genetic information between ourselves and other organisms, and how we use this to interact with our environment. Maybe it's time we change the rhetoric. Instead of, I've heard it too many times, it almost implies mutually assured destruction. How about, we're here to help each other. I hope I've inspired you to look deeper into the subjects we touched upon today. Our human race already has the technology, resources, infrastructure, and the ability to go way beyond the current pandemic stupidity. What miracles we may achieve in the future will manifest by those who make the effort. Mahalo nui loa loa loa, my fellow biologists, for your attention, your audience, your will to bravely seek the truth that liberates us with aloha.